Almost 3 years ago, Israel Adesanya gave a quiet and relatively unremarkable interview to a local outlet in which he had to say this.
Kickboxing fight, people were like, oh, you know, if you leave it to the judges, that was the Glory World title fight. And I won that fight, but then I didn't finish the guy. People were like, oh, well, that's what happens when you leave it to the judges. But that's easier said than when you're actually in the fucking ring trying to do the work. But then, yeah, this fight I fought and I got knocked out. My first and only ever knockout loss, and then my only back-to-back loss as well. So for me, it was a lot of learning. But I'm glad it happened because I wouldn't be here where it was. And even the same guy now he watches all my fights, and every time I fight, like clockwork, he'll try and put something out like, I beat this guy. But I've never ever watched any of his fights, ever. So at the end of the day, no one knows who the he is.
And these words would go down on to change the course of his life and his career forever. And that's no exaggeration. Because one man was watching. The man who Israel was talking about. The stone in Israel's shoe. Let's go back to the beginning of his story. Israel Adesanya, if you don't know, is a highly decorated UFC middleweight fighter, a long-reigning champion who is vying for the pound-for-pound title with a string of decisive knockouts and decisions over the division's elite. His technique, speed and timing were enough to outclass every opponent, to separate himself from them and to separate them from consciousness. Before the UFC, Israel had a long kickboxing career starting way back in 2010. He also dabbled with boxing and MMA throughout his time, and the combination of these alongside his kickboxing bouts took his striking to the next level and would make him a force in MMA as soon as he stepped in the octagon. Working his way up through the ranks, he fought in his home country, New Zealand, China and all across the globe, amassing an impressive 24-2 kickboxing record before facing off against his biggest opponent to date, and the man would later listen to an interview that Israel gave that would change both their lives in an instant. That man is Alex Poatan Pereira. Alex Pereira is a Brazilian kickboxer with the name Poatan, meaning hands of stone. If you watch his fights, this nickname doesn't really come as a surprise. He has incredible power, and what looks like even a relatively soft contact can mean the end of the night for his opponents. Alex was a formidable kickboxing talent, winning titles and bouts in impressive fashion, though his record before entering his first kickboxing bout with Adesanya was 13-4, not exactly undefeated phenom, but still impressive nonetheless. Fight 1. This took place on the 2nd of April 2016 at Glory of Heroes 1 in China. To hear Israel recount it, they traded fairly evenly on the feet before he started taking over and landing the better, harder strikes. The fight went the distance, the full 3 rounds, and Alex Pereira had his hand raised as the victor. On UFC Countdown, Israel is adamant that you can see the shock on Alex's face as his hand is raised, and that he knows he didn't win, blaming shitty judging for the loss. He shakes his head in a "what can you do" motion, a potential victory stolen away from him that would seemingly set the stone for the rest of the rivalry. Fight 2. The second fight took place almost a year later at Glory of Heroes 7 in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Alex's home country and another issue for stylebender. According to both Israel and Alex, Izzy was getting the better of the exchanges again, with Alex wobbling in the second round before being given a standing 8 count by the referee to check if he was fit to continue. From Izzy's perspective, he thought this was a tactic to help the home crowd favourite to stop Adesanya's continued onslaught and to give him vital seconds to recover and regain his composure. Poatan, knowing he was potentially 2 rounds down in a 3-round fight, came out in the third with a renewed sense of purpose and energy. After some tense back and forth, Alex threw a lethal 2-punch combination, missing with the first but then ultimately connecting with his signature left hook with the second, knocking Adesanya out cold in an incredible moment, clinching victory from the jaws of defeat and sending Israel out of the sport for good. That's true. After this fight, Israel Adesanya retired from professional kickboxing indefinitely. An incredible career, however, one that is often highlighted by 2 signature losses at the hands of the same foe. Israel didn't care too much, however, as he had his eyes set on a new mountain, a new challenge, a new sport. Israel had bigger plans in mind than just kickboxing. As mentioned before, Israel is no stranger to MMA. Having competed for the first time in the sport in 2012, he amassed a 9-0 record while competing at the highest levels of kickboxing. Clearly showing a talent for mixed martial arts, and with his exemplary stand-up skills, he was always gearing up to make the switch. With more spotlight, fame, money and opportunities in MMA, it was only a matter of time. Izzy didn't take long to make an impact. Just 8 short months after his knockout loss to Alex, he won 2 championships in 2 different MMA organizations, and these 2 titles, combined with his flashy striking skills, unique personality and kickboxing pedigree, this gave him the call-up to the UFC that he had been looking for. I don't want to spend too much time on Israel's UFC run, but to sum it up, he ran through the middleweight division. He alternated between devastating knockouts and utterly dominant decisions, racking up performance of the night bonuses, fight of the nights, bigger contracts, bigger fights, accolades, followers, limelight, and due to his flashy striking style, knockouts and unique, quirky personality, he was starting to get the full push of the UFC PR machine. The next superstar wasn't just coming, he was here, and his name was Israel Adesanya. In his 6th and 7th fight, he won the interim UFC middleweight championship and unified it in a spectacular performance, knocking out previous middleweight king Robert Whittaker. He shot to the top of the pound-for-pound rankings, and there was clamouring for a John Jones super fight. Israel had long forgotten his past life in kickboxing, becoming the face of MMA, cashing millions in fight purses and endorsements, and becoming a genuine crossover superstar, the likes of which would have been impossible if he had stayed in kickboxing. While all this was going on, Alex Pereira had done just that. He had stuck to kickboxing and was just making a name for himself. He, like Israel, had a few MMA fights too, but his sole focus was kickboxing. Winning multiple world championships in multiple organizations before signing with Glory, the premier kickboxing promotion, where he continued to rack up world titles and becoming their first ever 2-division champion. An incredible talent by any measurement, but with nowhere near the money, shine or admiration that Adesanya was currently receiving. He had won the battles, but had he lost the war? While Izzy was focused on the mountains in front of him, Alex played the only card he had, to continue to be the annoying little stone in his shoe. As Israel recalls it, every time he won a fight, Alex would be on social media posting that infamous knockout clip. Like clockwork, Pereira would wait until Adesanya won a fight and then post and share about how he had beaten him twice, and not just beaten him, had knocked him out. Posting and sharing that knockout clip over and over and over. Izzy noticed, but for a while he ignored it, focused on himself and his goals. What did he care if an old opponent posted a knockout of him? He was on to bigger and better things. That was ancient history. Things would be different now. It wasn't worth his time. He never let his frustrations bubble over. Then, on March 4th, 2020, in a relatively minor and random interview, he was asked about his old foe. And this time, he didn't hold back.
Glad it happened because I wouldn't be here where it was. And even the same guy now he watches all my fights, and every time I fight, like clockwork, he'll try and put something out like, I beat this guy. But I've never ever watched any of his fights, ever. So at the end of the day, no one knows who the f he is. And he's gonna be that guy when I'm world champion, when I'm a legend. He's gonna be at some pub, talking some shit about, I beat that guy one time, trying to get a dick sucked from a crack whore or some shit.
The full video is only 1 minute and 23 seconds long, entitled Israel Adesanya Knocked Out by Alex Pereira. Even after all his UFC success, dominating his division, being talked about in the pound-for-pound greats, he can't get away from the old questions, the old story, the old foe. It's not a big channel. The interview and question weren't anything groundbreaking, to be frank. It didn't really matter to many people, but it mattered to one person who watched it from across the globe. Alex watched and listened to this from 7,000 miles away in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and as the words Adesanya spoke spun around in his head, they ignited something in him, and a plan started to form with one purpose in mind: hunt Israel down and defeat him again. Maybe it was what he said, maybe it was how he said it, maybe it was the fact he mentioned Alex would be sitting at a bar, feeling sorry for himself, drunk. Alex has been open about the fact that he struggled with alcoholism throughout his early years and through the first 4 years of his professional career, having dropped out of school at 12 and soon was drinking a litre of Brazilian rum every day. You wonder, maybe he was sitting with a beer in his hand watching the interview, and it haunted him because he knew it might be the truth. What better way to change the future than to go out and create it? 7 months later, Pereira signed a contract with the Legacy Fighting Alliance, LFA, and began transitioning from kickboxing to MMA full-time. The UFC, sensing a potential mega fight with the only man to knock out their middleweight champion, signed Pereira after just one LFA fight, a brutal first-round knockout, and just like that, the stage was set. Not just a collusion course, but destiny itself. Pereira did his part, winning his next 3 fights, 2 via knockout in incredible fashion. Adesanya himself helped, as he was clearing out the division and was resorting to rematches for sellable fights. The UFC scheduled both men to fight on the same card on UFC 276 in July 2022 to set up the potential biggest title fight of the year. The plan went perfectly, with Pereira brutally KOing contender Sean Strickland with his touch of death left hook, and Adesanya causing to dominant victory in a unanimous decision over Jared Cannonier. The stage was now set for the old foes to fight once again, this time in a new sport. One Israel had been dominating for a while and was now set to get revenge on the only man to ever knock him out, and the man who never let him forget. Taking place in New York City, this fight had all the hallmarks of the previous 2 fights. The exchanges on the feet were technical and exciting, 2 former kickboxing champions putting it all on the line. After a back and forth first round with little more than a few seconds left, Adesanya caught Alex badly. Another few seconds on the clock and the fight could have ended right there. Probably would have ended. Alex stumbled back into his corner and tried to recover. Maybe too much time had passed. Had Israel's time finally come? Maybe he was right. Alex walked out for the next round and showed his heart and grit by coming back after almost being finished and winning the second round, taking the fight to 1 round each. Alex was landing beautiful calf kicks that were paying dividends. Israel was landing the crisper boxing combinations and looked to be controlling the pace of the fight. Israel Adesanya showed his heart and experience advantage by winning the next 2 rounds with a combination of grappling and striking. Alex had started to look a little tired and couldn't really land any meaningful strikes. 3-1 down coming into a final round, it was all or nothing. Was his inexperience in a new sport starting to show? His longtime friend and coach Glover Teixeira was yelling at him. He needed a knockout or else he would lose. He had to pour it out. Alex started the final round slow and it looked for all the world like the fairy tale ending wouldn't come, until the low kicks that Alex had been landing all fight started to show effects, with Izzy's mobility a bit impaired, making moving away harder and harder. Alex saw his chance and took it, with Adesanya backing away straight into the cage, trapped. What can you even say? Israel Adesanya can beat everybody, but Alex Pereira can beat Israel Adesanya. No matter how lost or bad the situation looks, no matter how tired or how rocked, Alex just seems to rise to the occasion every single time. The 3rd time, he has beaten Adesanya in combat sports. Nobody has ever done it twice, almost nobody even does it once. In just 2 years after that random interview, Alex Pereira has transitioned to a new sport, had learned and dedicated himself entirely to all aspects of MMA, had won his fights, got signed by the UFC, continued to beat whatever obstacle was put in front of him, and when he got his title shot with a little over a year of being in the company, against the man who taunted him in that interview, he knocked him out in the final round. Down on all the judges' scorecards, with all the chips down, all the cards on the table, he rose to the occasion and took away a piece of Adesanya's legacy, forever. Who knows what would have happened if Israel had never been asked a question or just gave a different answer, or if Alex was in a different mindset at the time. Everything could have been different. He may never have listened to it, he may have never cared, he may have continued on his kickboxing career. The prediction Adesanya gave may have come true, which is maybe that Alex feared most when he heard those words, why it lit the fire, why he knew he had to make a change. Before his title fight with Israel, Alex Pereira remembered that infamous interview, then asked about it in the build-up, stating, "I've never forgotten any word that he said," Pereira told ESPN. I use that as motivation to climb all the way up here for this. I'm like the stone in his shoe.